Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you back for your program Food for Thought. This time we're going to challenge a topic that is probably one of the toughest for us to understand. The whole question is that, does God have a plan for us? Is it a set plan that we have to follow through? That we have to go, let's say, take a job A versus a job B, go into that country versus this country. And for us, it really sometimes makes a hard time to understand how does God interact with us in terms of His plans and His purpose. So today we're going to try to tackle that question and make some sense in it in your program Food for Thought. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome back everyone to our program Food for Thought. So as we just said, a lot of us in our life, we struggle a lot with trying to understand the interaction of God with us in terms of our plans and how we go about in our day-to-day life. And for us, if we step back and ask the question, well, why is this important for us? I guess it's important for us because most of us feel tied with God in our plans. And we feel secure. Most of us want to kind of check and say, well, is God approving this or not? Is God wants me to go for this job, go for this position in that university or not? And a lot of us really care about what God wants from us in our life or not. But by the same token, it really puts a lot of stress on us because we care about it, we get stressed about it. And when we're stressed about it, sometimes we can't understand and feel how does God give us the guidance and the plan. So let's kind of set some clarity here. And I want to lay the ground rules first for that. And then we'll go into the Bible and try to make some understanding. The first thing that we need to know is that God does not necessarily have a set plan for us in terms of the specifics of what we do in our life. For example, you are in college and you're trying to kind of make some sense whether you should be a lawyer or should be a doctor. Both of them are great options. God doesn't really have a set plan, well, you have to be a doctor or otherwise you're going to be completely messed up. Or you have to go and take that job, A versus job B, or otherwise you're going to be messed up. If they're all about the same and they're all done with the glory of God, God doesn't necessarily have a preference for you being in that state versus this state, to immigrate from Egypt or stay in Egypt. God does not necessarily have that plan for us. That doesn't mean He doesn't have the foreknowledge. Absolutely, He has the foreknowledge. He knows what we will do before we even think and decide about doing it. But by the same token, that foreknowledge doesn't mean that He chose for us a certain occupation, a certain place to live, a certain person to marry, okay, and we're forced to do this. No, God gave us the choice to do and choose and plan for ourselves. So that is the ground rule number one. Ground rule number two, God's only plan for us is a heavenly plan. His plan for us is for us when we're born, we're baptized, and we're saved at the end and we enter in the kingdom of heaven. Because He made it clear, my kingdom is not from this world. So because His kingdom is not from this world, He's not going to make plans for us in the specifics of occupation, residence, marriage, take the job A versus job B. He's not going to make that for us, okay? Because His kingdom is not from this earth. His only plan is a heavenly plan, which means that everyone, all of us, will be saved and go up to heaven. But then comes the third ground rule. Although I've made the preface and made the qualification that God does not necessarily have an earthly plan for us, He has a big purpose for us. There's a difference between a plan and a purpose. A plan is a path that you choose to take. A purpose is the meaning behind the plan that you choose to take. As much as I said that if you choose to be an accountant versus a teacher, they're both equal in God's eyes. But His purpose behind you being an accountant versus being a teacher is that you glorify God in what you do, and through your job, you achieve your salvation. That is the difference. If you decide to stay in your own state or immigrate or leave your state, leave your home and leave your parents and go to another one, that plan is fine. But as long as you achieve your salvation, the purpose of glorifying God through that and achieving salvation through that. So by this is a big difference. And for us, a lot of us get very confused and get very anxious. Well, how do I know that God is blessing my plan? How do I know that God is blessing my choice in the university that I picked? And a lot of us we need to step back and know that God created us with a free will. We can choose the university that you want to go to. You can choose the job, the internship. You can choose the person that you want to marry. As long as you fulfill God's purpose in your life, which is what? Achieving the heavenly plan, your salvation, and achieving His purpose, which is the glorification of His name in everything that you do. So, is there something from the Bible that can help us to understand this? Well, absolutely. There's a great example in the Bible, and we'll talk about it when we come back from our break. Welcome back to your program, Food for Thought. So we're talking about God's plan and God's purpose in our life. And I would like to bring an example from the Bible that's just one of the most beautiful examples to prove this. The example of Jacob and Esau. This example has been a stumbling block for many people who believe in predestination, which us as a church, we don't necessarily believe in. We believe that God has foreknowledge, but He never favors anyone over the other. He had foreknowledge of what Esau is going to do and foreknowledge of what Jacob is going to do, but He never hated Esau just because he was Esau. So you look at both of them. Jacob clearly cared about his inheritance. Jacob clearly cared about his blessings. He was willing to go very, very far lengths to take care of it and to actually grab it to himself. He was willing to deceive. He was willing to cheat. He was willing to go along with his mother. He did everything. It was kind of interesting. When you look at Jacob, he wanted to take it with his own hand. And that's what God didn't like. God didn't despise Jacob because he did not want to take the blessing. He despised him because he cheated. Because you find actually in later stories where God actually gave the blessing, gave the inheritance to younger sons. You look at Judah. He was not the oldest, but he's the one who took the blessing. You look at Joseph's own sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay, it didn't go to the oldest. So if Jacob would have asked God for the blessing and the inheritance, God would have given it to him. But we all know the story. Jacob cheated to take the blessing, and God let him do his own plan. But what was the price that he had to pay for his own plan? He had to leave his home. He didn't see his mother after that. His mother died while he was away. He had to go and work for a very long time outside of his parents' home, where he was a king, okay, and then make up for that. But even with this, God let him go in his own way, but he had to learn the lesson. We all know that Jacob, after this, loved Rachel, and he said, well, you know what, I want to marry Rachel. It was different than when his grandfather, Abraham, wanted a wife for Isaac. He sent his servant, and the servant prayed to God to send him a wife for Isaac. And at that point, he sent him Rebekah. Jacob didn't pray. He kind of really showed off and said, you know what, well, I'm going to make an impression on Rachel. But we all know the story. His uncle fooled him. And instead of him working 7 years, he worked 14 years. That is the difference. Jacob wanted everything in his own way, and God let him. That is the difference. He had his plan, and God let him go through his plan. But because he didn't ask the blessing of God, he had to work really hard to get at his plan. If he would have asked the blessing of God, God would have blessed his plan, and he would have gotten it. But Jacob had to fall on his knees to really understand the difference between his own plan and finding the purpose of God in his own plan. The story goes on. Jacob becomes successful. He has a lot of sheep. He finds a way to make his sheep a lot and a bigger flock. But even when you look at this, you look at his uncle and his cousins, you know what? They hated him. They said, you know what? Get out of here. You're not a blessing to us. Completely different from his grandfather, Abraham, who everyone was begging, just stay with us because you're a blessing. So Jacob got it his own way. What did he end up being with? He ended up with everyone hating him. His own family, his uncle's family. He was kicked out. He was a refugee. And at that point, when he was a refugee, and he heard that Esau was coming on him with 400 strong men, he fell to his knees. That's when his weakness happened. And at that point, he prayed to God. You look at this, and at that point when God struggled with him, God had to break his hip. What was meaning breaking his hip is like, you know what, for once, do not count on your own strength. For once, do not count on your own power. For once, do not count on your own planning. When he got weak, when his hip was broken, at that point he reached out to God and told him, I'll not let you go until you bless me. And at this point, God told him, from now, you're not going to be Jacob. You're going to be Israel. So you look at this whole story. Jacob had good intentions. He wanted the blessing. He wanted the inheritance. But he planned it his own way. He didn't involve God. God let him do whatever he wants to do. Okay? He went through the whole thing. He married both women. He had many children. But at the end, God had to break him, that he learns and knows the purpose of God behind this, that he would not count on his strength when he's planning. But in the same time, God let him go through his plans. Same thing for us. You can go about doing your own plans because God does not have a predestined plan for you. You have your own intentions, your own desires, your own life. But whatever that life is, put God in the beginning of that. Find out how you can incorporate him into that plan. Don't go around 14 years and become an enemy to everyone that you know. So at the end you'll be broken in your hip so that you're weak enough to ask God, do not go until you bless me. That is the difference. So in this time, I hope I convinced you that whether you're going to choose job A or job B, state A or state B, profession A or profession B, in all those, it doesn't really matter to God. All what he wants for you is for you to be saved. So I hope at this time I convinced you that God has a purpose for you. And God has a plan, a heavenly plan for you. But we need some more guidance and tips for how can we understand God's guidance into us. And for that, we'll come back next time and talk about it. But I hope today I left you with some food for thought. Give it a thought. It might help you. And just have a blessed day.